chances are if you play Warhammer 40k, then you probably have your own personal favorite Space Marine chapter or legion, and even if they're not your main army or you play Age of Sigmar, then I bet you still secretly have a favorite because come on, admit it, Space Marines are kinda cool. And from the average Coldplay enjoyer Ultramarine fans, the people who watch Zootopia for all the wrong reasons, and the general cool guy Salamander players, I think that we can tell a lot about a person in general based on their favorite flavor of freaky buff spaceman. But there is one Space Marine chapter in particular which is so hideous, so heinous, so ungodly in their concept and color scheme that only a complete wrong'un with too much time would even consider ever painting them. It's me. And if you haven't guessed already, then of course the chapter that I'm talking about is the infamous and horrific Space Marine 2 fan chapter, the Crayon Eaters. And because I am a massive control freak and arguably an obsessive perfectionist, I am gonna try and attempt the impossible and make my very own Crayon Eaters Space Marine. But unfortunately for me, I know that just painting a terrible looking Space Marine for a bit of a laugh is not enough to satisfy me, so I am gonna be taking this challenge as seriously as I possibly can to see if I can make the world's ugliest Space Marine chapter actually look good. Whoosh. So you may have noticed in my intro that I referred to the Crayon Eaters as a Space Marine 2 fan chapter, as opposed to just calling them another one of the numerous 40k fan chapters. And that's because the Crayon Eaters in particular did come around specifically after the release of the video game Space Marine 2. Whilst the whole game is awesome and I'm a big fan of it in general, and I did a whole video about how good and fun it is, and I even wrote an article for PC Gamer about it too, in my opinion, one of the best features in the whole game was the Space Marine customization options, where you can try on different colors from different legions in order to create your own custom Space Marine. And of course, as you'd expect any good fandom with free will to do, the Warhammer community were quick to abuse this feature to the best of their ability, and they just ended up making the ugliest little Space Marines in the galaxy. But it wasn't until this viral post came around in which the poster shared their hench little abomination and lovingly christened them House of the Crayon Eaters that this chapter had an official name. From there, everyone was making their own Crayon Eater Space Marines. People were going viral daily for making their own spin on the color scheme. Lobbies were full of awkward interactions between Black Templars and the Toot Toot Clown World chapter masters, and even the devs of the game were posting their own Crayon Eater drips online. But back to the point. The main characteristic of a Crayon Eater is simply that they use as many different clashing colors on as many different parts of the armor as possible to create a single ceramite-clad monstrosity. However, unlike other Space Marine chapters, the Crayon Eaters don't really have strict uniform, heraldry, or color scheme rules. And by that I mean any Space Marine which looks like they have lost a wet t-shirt fight with an angry bag of Skittles could be considered a Crayon Eater, which makes these guys an absolute hotbed for creativity, and it kind of gives me the opportunity to dust off some cobwebs and paint using every paint in my collection, but also gives me the chance to make one freaky looking Space Marine, which, as you know, is one of my favorite things to do. So where to start with my own Crayon Eater? No, I'm just kidding. We're really doing this. I thought that since this chapter is very much rooted in Space Marine 2, that the victim shouldn't just be any old Space Marine, but should be the Space Marine Lieutenant Titus, the poster boy of Games Workshop's next big staff bonus. Enjoy your bonus. I got the commemorative special edition extra fancy Titus miniature from my local Games Workshop, and I set about assembling him, and if I'm being honest, it was absolutely no fun to do this part. I'm not gonna lie. Like, usually I'm super positive about this kind of stuff, but oh my god, having assembled pretty much nothing but Gundam for 3 months, trying to build what should be, in my opinion, an extremely beginner-friendly push fit, and a great entry miniature too for beginners beginners in the hobby aged me around 20 years. Eventually, with a little bit of elbow grease and a lot of Tamiya plastic cement, I got the miniature in just about working order. And because I couldn't really decide between the helmet and the head option, I decided to do something I'd never done before and try magnetizing both the head options. I got some super tiny magnets, drilled a tiny hole in the neck armor, and eventually, after I had figured out how magnets work, I had successfully made it so that I could swap the heads, which was pretty cool of me. I'm not gonna lie, I've never done this before, so I was really proud of myself. So now it was time for the most important step of all, which was coming up with my own Crayon Eater color scheme. And I thought, who better to entrust this extremely significant decision to than a Twitch chat full of 500 frantic Warhammer fans. We're going with purple. Purple works, but I'll make it like a very pinky purple? Or should I make it more of a blue purple? Military green! Oh, well, there you go. Ah, that's exactly what I just thought. Excellent. Love, hate this. Yellow. Okay, making something yellow. Who wants to pick the color for the elbow pad? Chrome elbow. Chrome. I can't do chrome elbow. I ain't doing that. Lime green. You got it. Let's have a look at how he's looking. Oh, yes. Yes, he's never looked better. Perfect. Eventually, after getting a bunch of random colors yelled at me for some time, some of which I didn't even know the name of, and after a few switch ups because some of the colors we used weren't actually options in Space Marine 2, and I wanted to kind of make it as accurate adjacent to the game as I could, we eventually landed on this. It's certainly got every single color possible, and they're all there, and therefore, yep, he meets all the criteria which would officially make him a bona fide and authentic Crayon Eaters Space Marine. So I guess it's time for me to stop procrastinating and actually start painting this guy. Since this guy is already going to be the most complicated color scheme in the history of color schemes ever, I wanted to make my technique a more simple one, so I opted for the heavy metal style of painting Space Marines. This just means that you base coat your areas with a medium version of the desired color, add 1 or 2 darker recess shades to add a little bit of contrast, and then finish up with 2 or 3 edge highlights and some of the sharp corners and details to make it look pristine and sharp. And I'm hoping that doing it this way will not only give me a little bit of structure as I go along, but also stop me from losing my mind entirely halfway through the project. After I'd base coated the whole thing in all of my various base colors, in order to kind of get a feel for the mini as a whole, I honestly considered giving up on the project at this point because I thought that there was no way I could possibly get this miniature to look any way good, and that really upset me, but I persevered and I just opted to paint up one color at a time to completion. I started with the red sections, doing my simple but effective heavy metal technique, then I moved on to orange and purple and yellow, and after the 3rd or 4th color, I realized that I was actually having a really good time here. It was a little bit like batch painting, but way more enjoyable because the things that I was painting came together super quickly, and speaking of which, this felt like the quickest I've ever painted a Space Marine, and weirdly also the most fun I've ever had doing it too. It kept what's usually a bit of a slog when you're painting Space Marines and you're just using the same 4 colors on 19 panels really fun and interesting. All of the panels came together really quickly, and I also felt like I was getting in some great practice with painting basically every single color ever as well. Speaking of which, the Rogue Hobbies Pro Acryl Signature Series set that I made with Monument Hobbies absolutely came in clutch in this project, especially the red, blue, green, the yellow, and the turquoise. So actually, I guess all of it really. It's like I know that I like to paint weird stuff like this. And if you like painting with bright colors too, and you want to try the set out, then I always pop an affiliate link and a discount code in my description box below, so you can have a little discount if you want to try them out yourselves. You're welcome. Once I had finished up what surprisingly had turned out to be the fun part of the miniature, it was time to move on to the trim, and as usual I opted for some bright non-metallic gold. However, unlike the fancy colours, I also, as usual, did not enjoy doing the non-metallic trim, but I always like to try and do non-metallics just for the practice, and because I think that if I keep struggling, then maybe one day I'll be good at it. And I think that in the end they looked kind of okay, and at this point I don't really hate the armor, which is something I wasn't really expecting to say. So with all of the main armor pieces done, it was time to move on to some of the focal points of the miniature, kind of trust the process and hope that with a bit of luck, it'll all come together in the end. The focal point of a miniature is usually considered to be the miniature's face, and I think in Titus's case it's safe to say that his chiseled jawline and winning smile is definitely his best features. So for that reason, I wanted to spend a lot of time painting up his face to look as defined, realistic, and game accurate as I possibly could, and also because I just really like painting Space Marine faces. I think they are great fun to do. So yeah, I went pretty hard on his fleshy flesh face, and I think it ended up really good, and he looks very handsome too. For the helmet, I honestly really struggled with what color to pick for this very important focal part of the Crayon Eater. There didn't really feel like an obvious good color to choose here because I had essentially used them all already, so I landed on picking the most primary color of all, bright red. And because that wasn't good enough or fancy enough for my taste, I also decided to do this colourful stripe down the centre of his helmet too. My thinking here was to kind of try and link this chapter visually in with my other favourite Ultramarine successor chapter, the Rainbow Warriors, who pretty much have an inverted version of this helmet I'm painting here for my Crayon Eater. Since I was already stoked that he looked a little bit Rainbow Warrior-y, I decided to finish off the armor by freehanding in some fun Rogue Trader style details to add a little bit of interest to the armor, but also break up the intensity of his color scheme a little bit too. I freehanded some classic text on his weapons with some ominous tally marks, and I added in a cool heraldic checkered pattern on his knee, which is actually something you can do in Space Marine 2, which is neat, and you love to see it being at least somewhat game accurate. But there was one more thing I had to do to finish off the armor, which I was kind of avoiding, and that of course was paint his shoulder pad. It's empty. It's so sad. Titus is an Ultramarine, and as expected, the Ultramarine symbol is sculpted onto this particular miniature's knee and backpack, but that's lame, and I don't want to do an Ultramarine symbol on his shoulder. And if the Rainbow Warriors can have a cool successor chapter symbol of the Ultramarines, then the Crayon Eaters can too. So I am going to give them their own custom chapter symbol, and because when I googled it I couldn't see anyone who had made one up before, I am going to make one up myself. Since the World Eaters are an already established legion with their own motif, I thought I'd riff off their big toothy jaw element as a kind of 40k visual language indicator for the word eater. But instead of them chomping on a world, I'd replace that element with a munched up classic red Crayola looking crayon. And honestly, I think the symbol looks pretty fun and not instantly overly goofy at a glance, even though at the shoulder pad scale, I do think the crayon doesn't read very crayony. I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh here, but either way, I really like it. At this point, I saw Titus was looking just about done, which meant it was time to get him all based up. Since the miniature already comes with a small tactical rock style of base already attached to his feet, I painted that up very simply using some dark greys to contrast all of the bright colors on top. And then obviously I opted to put him on a plinth, because don't forget, plinths make miniatures look better. Fact. And with that, he was all done, which means it's finally time for me to reveal to you my take on the world's ugliest Space Marine chapter. And here he is. Lieutenant Titus has left behind his days of following the boring old Ultramarine Codex Astartes and has finally joined the bright and chaotic ranks of the Crayon Eaters. And is it just me, or does he actually look kinda cool. Like, I'm sort of annoyed to admit it, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but this may be the best painted Space Marine I have ever done. Sure, the color scheme is hideous and definitely shouldn't work, but that sort of makes it work, and there's certain elements of it that I really like. I think that the split white and teal is super nice, and that contrasted with the red leg and the red helmet too also just kinda works somehow. But saying that, as soon as you pop off the helmeted variant and put on Titus's flesh head, I do think it does look a little less good overall. I think that the helmet is really carrying this entire color scheme insofar as it really does help tie the whole thing together. And the realistic human head, whilst very handsome, sort of makes all the rest of the armor look a little bit uncanny and weird in comparison, which I guess is the point of this color scheme anyway, but I'm just gonna stick with the helmet variant for now. But overall, this was such a fun little challenge to do, and I am so glad that I didn't just give up at the first hurdle when it started to look a little bit weird, because now I've painted what, again, weirdly, I think may be my favorite Space Marine ever. And if you also want to join in and paint your own Crayon Eater, then I highly recommend that you just take the plunge and do it, because it is the best fun I have had painting a Space Marine in my history of painting Space Marines. However, I'd maybe hold off painting an entire army of them for now. You know, for your own sanity. But unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. As usual, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for being rogues. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!